Elaine Hsieh Chou, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I usually get to meet all of the Young Lions finalists at the awards, and I was bummed that I couldn't be there this year. So how was your experience at these awards? Did you have a good time?
Oh, yeah, it was amazing. I mean, that building is so beautiful. And
Yeah.
the way it was presented, it was like a dance party in this really regal, that lobby. So it was so cool to be able to experience that. And the entire ceremony was so lovely. Everyone at NYPL was so kind. And Ethan Hawke was there, and
Yeah.
that was very cool. And yeah, it was magical. It really was.
Yeah, it's such an amazing event. That library just never stops stunning me. Every time I walk in, I feel my breath taken away.
Mhm. Yeah, same.
And the history of all of it too. I mean, they've given me tours and things where they're telling you like this was flown here from France and this was flown here from Italy and this stone was dug up. You're like, what? Well, I love your book Disorientation. I think a lot of people love your book Disorientation. It's something that I think is so hard to achieve, which is I was laughing out loud, but also crying at times, which
Oh,
I think is such a cool way to reach the readership. I wanted to start by asking you actually about your grandma, because I realized there's this beautiful inscription to her at the beginning to Shay. How do you pronounce it? Say Shay Shu Hua? Is that right?
这寿花.
Shay Shu Hua. And it says, who hid in the mountains eating raw cabbage and survived the bombs. Holy cow. Tell me about her.
Oh my God, I'm so happy you asked this question. I actually think I've never talked about this, like,
Really?
yeah, in an interview or anything. So it's so nice that I get to talk about my dear grandma, who has since passed away, but she was such a strong woman. Yeah, so when she was only, I think, 5 or 6 years old, well, World War II happened,
Wow.
and she was living in this small village in China, and there were bombs all the time, and also soldiers coming in to take the woman.
Oh
She didn't
God.
say explicitly what, but she just kept telling me like, "You're too young to understand. It was horrible what they did to them." And I was like, "Oh, I know what they did, Grandma." But
Oh,
her and her older sister luckily evaded that. But then there would be these like sirens alerting the village when a bomb was going to hit, or had hit. And so there's a shelter
mm,
that I think two could fit something like 200 people. So
okay.
normally her and her sister would run to the shelter, but her sister actually, she like tripped and fell. Something happened where she hurt herself and they could no longer go. So they ran, I guess, to nearby mountains, and they would hide inside them, and for days, and there was nothing to eat. I'm not sure, even sure if cabbage is the exact translation, but just like what they thought was edible, plants around them.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and what is so incredible is that day of the bombing, of this particular bombing, the shelter was bombed. It was a direct hit. I mean, it was awful. It was terrible. Everyone
Oh,
died.
oh,
And so sometimes when I think about it, I'm like, I can't believe I'm alive. Like,
yeah.
the odds that I'm alive, because not only did she survive that, to then basically escape to Taiwan, she had to also travel across China. Was this? Yeah, like this was before, there weren't, like, I think she traveled a lot on foot, actually, to kind of
Wow.
figure out these like difficult ways to travel so many miles. So I'm so grateful to her, and of course other members of my family who have survived um thing difficult,
Yeah. So
but
is this the your grandmother on your mom's side or your dad's side?
my dad's side.
And then this is where your Taiwanese roots come from because she eventually made it to Taiwan and that's
Exactly, yeah. So she went
wow.
to Taiwan. with my grandpa on my dad's side. So they had met in China, and then yeah, my dad was born in Taiwan, and my mom was also born in Taiwan.
Oh
So
my gosh,
that's
wow.
how.
It is so wild when you think about what it takes for any one of us to exist, but something like that is like really next level. Like, I mean, as a little
Right.
kid to have had this instinct to not go in the bomb shelter and then be able to
Yeah.
survive. You know, you look at a little kid and you don't think, "Oh yeah, send that kid into the mountains and they'll find a way to survive." Like, "Oh my God, it's incredible." It's
You know,
really incredible. And so
yeah.
then when did your family come from Taiwan to America?
My dad immigrated in the the 70s, I believe. Yeah, he came, yeah, his way in basically was through studying. So he studied
Interesting.
physics. Um and yeah, that's when he came over. So there's pictures of him like looking very cool, and bell bottoms, and like the aviator glasses, and like, who were you, dad? But yeah, that's when he came. And um it's such a funny thing because I love Taiwan so much, and sometimes I'm like, would I have been happier if I had grown up?
Oh, wow. No, I mean, it's a
But
very valid question, especially with a lot of the subjects that you're touching on in disorientation. I mean, obviously it is not an easy it's not an easy path to be an Asian in America. I don't think it ever has been, and it certainly isn't right now. And I feel like again, that's why I think it's such an incredible thing that you accomplished with how much joy and humor is in a book that also has an incredible amount of painful subject matter and rage in. It's interesting because like I know that you've written a lot about rage and the book sort of has that word connected to it a lot. And I didn't really it's interesting because as I read it, I think because your heart is so open and so joyful and so optimistic, I think. I mean, I don't know you. I'm just meeting you now, but my take on it is that from your writing that I thought, "Oh, I wonder if the same book had been written by a man, would people equate the word rage with it?" Do you know what I mean? Like, because I you know what I'm saying? Like, I just feel like there's a double standard of when like rage becomes the word for something when it's a woman writing versus when it's a man writing. And
totally.
I don't like when I looked back at my review compared to some of the things I was reading, I was like, oh, I didn't really mention rage. I just because it feels so earned. It just feels like, well,
Mhm.
yeah, you would be angry and frustrated when all of these things are happening. Does that
Yeah.
resonate, or am I just imagining that there's that double standard?
No, totally. Yeah, yeah. There's something. I think there's even a term that like people use a lot, right? Like female rage as this very specific um phenomenon, I suppose. But um, yeah, I think I felt a lot of rage when I was writing it, and
Mhm.
or I suppose why I felt motivated to write it. But then I think so much of the act of writing it was joyful for me.
Yeah,
And yeah, what you said means a lot to me, that there is an optimism in it, because how else are you going to wake up and care and like wake up
yeah.
the next day and then wake up, I think it's also like a metaphor for writing. The
Yeah,
pain
yeah. But I
of
mean,
continued writing.
I felt like, I mean, listen, I'm, a privileged white person in America. So my experience of life is very different than yours or anyone who's Asian in America. But I felt like it was so clear in a way that I don't think it's ever been clear to me, that daily, that like the death of a thousand cuts kind of feel, where it's just like every little example that you're not hitting us over the head with it. It's just the truth of Ingrid's experience, which is like, the fact that she was accused of plagiarizing a book report when she was a kid because it was possibly too articulate. I was like, no one would have said that to a white kid. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was
Yeah,
like, and it's
that
so,
happened to me twice in high school.
I, come on,
I was
come
accused of
on.
plagiarism for on no ground, like
And
the
then with
ground.
nothing that they could point to, right? Like, they're like, we
Yeah,
don't know what you plagiarized, but you must have plagiarized.
yeah. I mean, sometimes it's like I'm like, was it because of the way I look, or was it sort of how I presented in high school. I
Mm.
had like my Valley Girl phase. And so, so
Oh,
I'm
that's
like, maybe
amazing.
they think I was just, they were like, well, based on how you dress and talk, like, in that Valley Girl way that we don't think you could have, or maybe it was a mix, because that's the thing is you'll never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is funny that sometimes, and I've heard this from other friends, the stereotype of like, well, if you're Asian, you just must be seen as really smart. But it's funny, it's like maybe for certain subjects, but like I kept getting accused for English essays and history papers. I was like, well, I guess they don't expect us to be good at those things.
That is so
Like
crazy.
math and science, yes, but I was always so bad at math and science.
Oh man, I don't know. It just, I mean, that's just one example of a thousand things that are highlighted in the book, moments in the book that I was just like, I can't imagine dealing with that all day, every day, and trying to imagine the way that would impact my sense of self or how I viewed the world, and it was so cool to watch Ingrid go from where she starts in the novel, which is so impacted by all of that, all of the stuff that's been put on her and all of the expectations and those things that have been sort of fetishized, in the way that she kind of just survived all of it and was in a way accepting all of it, and then unravels and like takes apart all of these things that have been put upon her to get to the end of the novel where she's in a very different place. I mean, in a way she's at a new beginning at the end. But it's incredible to go through that journey with her, and then also to feel like all the people around her have their own versions of those things going on. I was even noticing, like you were mentioning the way you dressed in high school. I feel like, Ingrid, and the way that she's talking about, like she was buying new brooches for her professor years that were coming or something, like it was like she was going to dress the part a little bit the same way like Eunice later, when they're like going into break into John Smith's house, like she's dressed like a robber or something. It's like these roles that everybody's trying on as they're,
Yeah.
getting through their sense of self, but it's manifesting in their clothing in some way, which I thought was so interesting. It was such a cool
Yeah.
sort of physicalization of their internal lives.
Oh my God, you're also the first person who's noticed that or
Really?
mentioned that. But I think that's, yeah, in a book where, and this is like a theme that I think emerged maybe as I was close to finishing, but the whole, yeah, what is identity, right?
Yeah.
And how do we fabricate identity all the time, try it on, take it off?
Yeah.
But you're right, like clothes, they factor into that and sort of like how we read each other, right? So Ingrid doesn't know Vivian really at all, like they've never really talked, but based on how she dresses,
Yep.
her makeup and her hair, she's like, you're this type of person.
Yeah.
And like the schoolgirl outfit, that's like, all, there's so much symbolism to that outfit.
Totally.
And it's true. It's something maybe we don't notice as much like in books, but now that I'm like in this the screenwriting space and everything, it's such a big part of building characters is how do you visually see them, and it tells you so much
Yep.
about how we're supposed to read this character. But thank you for noticing that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I also, part of it was because I was about halfway through the novel when I looked back at the cover. Usually I read and I'm not really thinking much of the cover, usually because covers don't really say much for any given book. Except for I did read your essay that was hilarious about like what's allowed on Asian book covers or something. I was like, oh my God, what a great satire of the truth of this situation. But then I looked back and I was like, this is an incredibly accurate book cover. I mean, for anyone who's looking, you can see, and then for anyone listening, it's like, I don't know, all these pieces of her life. It's the school uniform, it's the shoes, it's the pills, it's the books, it's her pen, it's a broken vase, it's the pink room. I like the sky outside, and that's sort of like the unknown outside the store. Did you get to pick this cover? Because I feel like it's such an excellent cover.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I owe it all to the artists, Aaliyah Muraski, and Sam Copeland, who also helped build the design. So it was like a shot in the dark. It was honestly really hard
Mm.
to in make it happen, to put it simply, because Aaliyah, I had been following her work on online. What's the name? Tag her
Oh,
name
her
is
your at
at
mention.
Aaliyah. Yes, Aleia for anyone who's interested in checking out her work. I mean, she's so talented. So she builds dioramas for
Mm.
snails. She
What?
has pet snails. Yeah, she's incredible, and her mind is so wacky and imaginative, and and her art is surreal and playful and sort of tongue in cheek, and it was everything that I wanted the cover to be. But of course, she, had not designed a book cover before, so that was like a whole long road. But I believed in her from the start, and I just knew with all my heart, like, this is the artist for it.
Yeah.
um, and she pulled it together in a really short amount of time, and she put so much love and care into it. So everything was made by hand except for some of the things like the vase she had to order, and then she smashed it in like a vice, like she had to put in this metal
Oh,
vice.
wow.
This schoolgirl outfit she sewed from scratch by
What?
hand. The bed is made from cardboard, and it's wrapped in fabric. The waffle dogs are made from polymer clay, and she sent them to me. I actually have them and
Oh
the bed.
my
She said, yeah,
gosh.
I mean, it is a labor of
I
love.
had no idea this was like an actual diorama. I thought this was some sort of digital creation. That's
Yeah, everyone thinks,
incredible.
but it's a photo. The cover is actually a photo, and if you turn the camera at a certain angle, you'll see these tiny wires holding up the objects.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I think she posted it, like on her Instagram. One of the posts shows
I'll have to go
that.
look for that. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
I
Has a
know, isn't
snail
she?
lived in your room? Has a snail lived in this room?
I don't think she put a snail in there. um,
Wow, that's so cool. That's amazing. And
yeah.
that's amazing that they let you choose the artist. I don't know how any of this works. I'm a lover of books, but I don't completely know, except for the conversations I've gotten to have with authors, about their experience with publishing and the process and all that stuff. But how were you able to choose your own artist and put that in motion? Was that something that the publisher was supportive of, or was that something you had to really fight for?
Hmm. I think I think a
Well, you can say we
combination.
can pass. If you want to plead the fifth on this one, you don't have to answer. I understand
I
if it's
mean,
complicated.
maybe this is like the after hours with
Got it.
just you and I, Jen. But
Got it.
I think, yeah, it was just, I had to have unwavering faith, and at one point it just felt very like tenuous, and
Mm,
um but I'm really thankful that in the end everything worked out, and the imprint, I mean, loves it, and
great.
yeah, really does love the cover. So in the end,
Yes, it all worked out. That's amazing. And then I know I'm kind of jumping back a little bit. You were talking about how you're in screenplay land now with this because you sold this to I'm trying to remember the companies, a couple
oh,
different
no
companies. It's
worries.
Adam McKay's company and Malala's company, is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, yeah.
And
They
so
optioned it.
okay, and so how did that come about? Like, does Adam McKay just call you up, or like what happened?
Oh, if only it were that. Well, what happened was, so I, even more than a year before the novel came out, I want to say something like, was it January? No, I think it was like January 2021. Yeah, so a little bit before, like over a year before the
Yeah.
novel actually came out. My literary agents one day sent me an email saying, "Oh, this TV and film manager, Tara Taminsky, really loves your book and wants to like represent you." And I was like, "What?" Film and TV? Like, I just in my head, because I had never gone through this before, I just assumed the book has to come out first.
You'd
Like, I
think,
don't think
yeah.
we didn't have the cover yet. We didn't have arcs, but there's this whole world of book scouts and people who's they're TV and film managers, but they specialize in book to screen adaptation.
Hmm.
So their whole thing is to get manuscripts when they're announced on like Publishers Marketplace.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's how I think she initially found the book. And then when it had gone through, I guess, not even all the edits, but like enough edits, they were like, they sent it to her because they had worked with her before. And so we had a call, and I mean, I love her. She's still my manager, and I have another one now, but yeah, she was just like, I want to, take this out, like set you up
Wow.
on meetings. And I was like, whoa. And um, she didn't know. So at that point, I'd been like secretly teaching myself screenwriting. And I guess secretly because yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. And it felt almost embarrassing to like announce, here I, learning something from scratch and flailing and not really knowing what I was doing. But I told her I've written this feature, and would you check it out? And she was like, this is not half bad for like your first
Oh,
scripted
wow.
for a novelist, like turning to this craft. Like, I think we can fight for you to adapt it. So normally the ideal, not even the ideal, but the easier process is the author wants nothing to do with adapting it and will just maybe take like an executive producer credit
Yeah.
and just hands it off, right? It's
Okay.
like someone else adapt it and write it. I'm not a screenwriter, but because I loved what I was learning, like I had fallen in love with this new form, I was like, I really want to try it, and I think I can do it. And that made the process harder because a lot of production companies were like, well, if she's going to adapt it, like, no.
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
ones that stuck around really were the ones who believed in me enough,
Yeah.
even though there was literally zero proof at that time, because that feature I wrote was not like ready to be, really sent out or anything. But yeah, so those two companies, Adam McKay's Hyper Object, and then Malala's Extracurricular, were two of the ones who believed in me. Um, and so they didn't reach out. It was my manager pitching them and then setting up meetings for me. So I had to learn how to pitch in a
Yep.
very short amount of time. I had to learn, yeah, it was like a crash course in what's a pitch doc, what goes in a pitch doc, how do you talk about this story as a
Yeah. And
movie.
how did you do that? Because honestly, listen, I have to pitch as a director all the time, which is different than having to pitch as a writer. I've also been a director listening to writers' pitches. I
Mm,
mean, but there's no set way. What did you, I'm always curious because all I know is what I did on my own when I was clueless to try to figure out what to
right.
do. Like, where did you turn to even figure out what to do with a pitch document?
Yeah. Well, luckily Tara like led me through it all. Like, she sent me a bunch of real pitch docs.
Okay.
Some of them are like, were internal docs from her clients or clients at her company. And then some of them were the really famous ones that everyone on the internet has seen. So, like the Stranger Things,
Mm,
formerly known as Montauk, that pitch deck, more like, with the visual, that's like, it was such a powerful example of um, building the world so clearly. And specifically the Fargo pitch
oh,
doc,
interesting.
Freaks and Geeks, New Girl. Yeah, there's a few that are just on the internet because a lot of them you can't access, and
Yeah.
you aren't going to release them. But
By
luckily,
the way,
those.
I'm going to go look up all of these now. I've never seen any of them. I was like, this is great. What a great idea.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Fargo one is really cool too. It has a fascinating story arc, like season arc, that's a triangle. So I've never seen anything like it.
That's cool.
Um, but she sent me all that, and like she sent me like Netflix has put together how to pitch document, and I was looking just online, like nofilmschool.com and like Studio Binder, like a few of these websites, they have tons of information out there. And I was just like, okay, this is what it looks like. I've seen the example, and now I'm I basically have to learn how to fill it in. And then I would
Yeah,
sit with Tara and she would give me notes and we'd go like back and forth. And I think I did a practice pitch with her, so
sure.
just straight like 20 minutes. I just talk nonstop, and so she let me practice, and then it was trial and error, right? Like I feel the first few times I did it, you learn how to be more conversational and not just be like, okay, and so then the log line is this, and then the genre is
Let me
this.
tell you, not everyone learns how to be more conversational. I've definitely been on those pitches. Like I've been attached as a director to projects where I'm like waiting for the writer to pitch and I'm like, oh God, oh God, we really are just going to read this whole document.
There you go. Yep, yep.
And I'm
So
doing my best
that's
acting as I'm watching, going like, oh, okay,
right.
yeah,
Trying not to like zone out. Yeah, exactly. It's hard. It's so hard because it's
yeah,
like to meet that precious timeline of like the 20 minutes, you
yeah.
kind of have to like plan it out. If you go off the cuff, you end up talking for like either 10 minutes or an hour or something. Well, I guess people wouldn't mind 10 minutes,
Sure.
um but yeah, that's how I learned.
Wow, that's
And
amazing. It's such
oh,
a sink or swim situation, huh? It's like you just kind of figure it out.
that's true. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are lots of overlaps, with like um just storytelling. But
Yeah.
what I loved about even just creating the pitch doc was a kind of like zoomed out structure that I just didn't had never been taught, or really, yeah, it's not really like a thing so much in fiction writing and like the workshops I had taken, and
Mm.
I did an MFA, but just like, so I'm actually teaching a class for Tin House that's like for fiction writers who are struggling with structure, like big
Huh.
picture stuff, or just like how do you build out this tiny idea you have.
Yeah.
And part of it is we're going to create a pitch doc together and like a beat sheet, because all of that just helps me with storytelling in general. I feel like I can't really go back to how I thought of storytelling
How
before,
cool.
because
Yeah.
I have these sort of like methods, and you can break the mold, of course, but I feel like it's such a great starting point to be
Yeah.
like, oh, if I were to choose like three comps,
Yeah.
why would I choose these, and what tone would it create, and like the overall
Yeah. And so
everything.
are you developing Disorientation as a film or as a show?
As
As
a
a
film.
as a film?
Yeah.
Because I feel
Yes.
like there's so much in it. I was not surprised at all that you had made a deal to have this made because I was like, it's so active, which is so
Mm.
rare, I feel like, for fiction, at least these days. Um, I mean, listen, I love me some very internal fiction. Don't get me wrong, I'm all about it. But it was this great balance because I felt very inside of Ingrid's mind and I felt very inside of her experience, and it did feel internal in that way. But so much happens. I mean, I was curious if you had outlined it because I feel like I don't know. I guess like this story in someone else's hands, maybe one big turn would have happened in the whole book. And I feel like,
Oh.
you know what I'm saying? Like you were so able to manage so many big twists and turns of physical events that happen that feel very visual. Is that something that you set out to do, or was it just naturally evolving, or did you outline it, or what was that process for you in terms of? I mean, she finds one little note in the book and
Yeah.
that sets this whole thing in motion, but that sets in motion like protests and people's lives changing and her
Yeah.
eventual like not marrying Stephen or Stefan. I
Right.
never sure when it's PH, if it's Stephen or Stefan.
Oh,
Is it
Steven, yeah.
Stephen? Um, and like Michael's life changing, and I mean, it's literally like they
Yeah.
break in at one point. I'm like, oh my god, now they're breaking in, and now this John Smith isn't who he said he was, and Michael's involved, and I was like, it's just, I was like, I couldn't even keep a list of these big plot points. I was like, there's so much going on, which is so captivating when you're reading and so exciting because, like I said, so often you're like you read a novel where it's one thought that takes 300 pages, and this was like just jam packed with action. So tell me about that process.
Oh, oh, great. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. Well, I realized my thing as a writer, a sort of neuroticism I have, you know, all writers are neurotic, but one of mine is I'm like deathly afraid of boring people.
Mm,
And I didn't realize that until, you know, you start to see patterns in work and how I would feel this anxiety of like, am I boring the reader? And I guess like as me as a reader, I tend to look for, yeah, I guess turns and twists and you kind of want to write the book, you know, that you want to read in a way. So
sure.
I think I had a lot of fun constantly asking myself, what if? Like I kept being afraid that I wasn't examining a situation or a character or, you know, character's choice um, fully enough.
Yeah.
Like when they had made a choice, I feel like I would sort of try to like turn it over and over in my head to be like, well, what else? Like what's like the flip side of that? Or what if they then felt forced to do that? Or I really tried to keep pushing sort of every character or storyline until its end, right?
Yeah.
Like there were ways that I could keep pushing it. And how it happened, I think so I wrote like three separate versions of the novel from scratch.
What?
Yeah, and the first version, Ingrid is in her 50s. She's a professor. She's married to a congressman. She has two kids. So
What?
I scrapped almost everything that happened except what stayed the same was always her relationship with her white partner, what
Mm,
she has to examine there. And she always still makes this big discovery about Xiao Chou, the poet. But but yeah, it ended up not working. It was sort of like a multi POV family drama kind of novel, and then the second novel, I was like, okay, I'm gonna second version. I was like, I'm gonna throw away everything besides Ingrid and write it from her first person perspective. So I wrote it all in the
wow.
first person. And then she was engaged. I think no, she wasn't engaged. She just had a boyfriend who worked in tech.
Mm.
So do you remember that Your Face But Better app that like turns your face
Like
and
a face tuning thing or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, that you and Eunice dates that like tech bro. Um,
Yes. Bad.
so yeah, he was originally Josh and he was Ingrid's boyfriend.
No way. This is
We're talking
amazing. This is like an alternate universe. This is incredible.
it is so weird to think about this other universe because it was, you know, there's like definitely like a kind of stereotype of like Silicon Valley type guys, and they're at like you go to San Francisco, there's like a whole joke about, you know, you just see couples like Ingrid and Steven, you know, everywhere. And so I was like, of course her boyfriend would be like a techie, and of course he'd be doing something terrible. But that I think all the changes, the way everything I had to keep throwing things up in the air,
Yeah.
right? And letting go and asking myself, like, well, if I let it go, like what else is under there? And if I test myself, I try to push myself, like what else can I find? I think going through that just carried on. And all these like little ideas I had would like manifest then finally in the third version, which is like the published version.
As many of you know, I am obsessed with Frida Salvador shoes, and I am so excited to say that this episode is brought to you by Frida Salvador. Style is a part of all of us. It's the first way we express ourselves in the morning, and it's the first impression we give to those around us. But finding that right piece that's both comfortable and expresses your individual style takes time. And that's why I wanted to introduce you to my favorite brand, Frida Salvador, designed in California by my friends Christina and Megan. They are inspired by individual style, and they are on a mission to build community from the ground up. I cannot tell you how many times when I'm wearing these shoes, someone comes up to me and goes, "Look, I'm wearing them too. Aren't they so amazing? Isn't it incredible how comfortable they are?" This shoe really has a community around it. They are the coolest shoes and accessories handcrafted by artisans in Spain and El Salvador with the highest quality Italian leathers they can find. I love these styles because they are classic but reimagined with statement details. And I also trust Frida to deliver impeccably made pieces that will be in my closet forever. I love them. I wear them almost every day. I highly recommend you check out their latest collection, and I will give you 15% off with my code Jen's Bookshelf. Just visit fridasalvador.com for 15% off with the code Jen's Bookshelf. that is so brave.
Oh,
How did you know when it felt right? Was there like a feeling when you were like, okay, this third version, this is the thing that it's meant to be? Was there a different feeling about that, about those, whatever it is, 70,000 or 100,000 words, where you're just like, no, this feels like what it wants to be. Whereas like versions 1 and 2, you're like, something's not right.
totally, yeah. And hearing, what other people thought makes a big
Sure.
difference. Because the first version, I mean, I had sent it to beta readers, my dear beloved beta readers, and I got, positive feedback and everything, but I told myself I would put it in a drawer for 3 months. I
Hmm.
do recommend this to all writers. Put it in a drawer for 3 months. See
Yeah.
how you feel about it. I read it again and it was like, I hate this. Because
Oh shit.
the biggest issue was it wasn't my voice. That first version, I was so compelled and inspired by Paul Beatty's The Sellout. So I had read that novel like pretty recently, right before I started
Yeah.
writing, because even though I had planned and outlined before, I didn't start actually writing until several months after that. And I think his voice, and that the voice of that narrator, that's very knowing and kind of snarky, that I just
Mm,
loved. um I was trying to be Paul Beatty, and there's only one. Listen, there's only
yeah.
one. So I think that's why when I took it out after 3 months, and you kind of out of the haze of frantically writing all the time, you can't really
Yes.
get out of your head, get out of your work. I was like, oh, this isn't me. This is me trying to sound like someone else who I admire a lot, but it's not me,
That's so
And so I
interesting
was like,
too, because like, sorry to interrupt, because I want to put a pin in that and
oh,
keep going.
please.
It just makes me think about when there's one section where you put one of the poems and then you put Ingrid's assessment notes of the poem. And it is very different writing than the rest of the book. And it's very like flowery, and I had to look up almost every word. I was like, the vocabulary that Ingrid has is incredible. But it was so not indulgent, I don't know what the word is for it, but it was trying really hard to be something that maybe she wasn't.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you're saying that, because I feel like that manifests itself in Ingrid a little bit in terms of
Oh
like
yeah.
her way that she writes about writing compared to
Yes.
how you write. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Academic writing, my take is that it's like the one realm of writing where the more confusing and obscure and really in a way cliquish, right? Because it's not meant to be accessible. The more clear and accessible
Mm,
academic writing is, the more it's seen as a failure.
that is bizarre.
And yeah, because I in another life I was studying for my PhD and I was writing a dissertation, and academic writing was like pulling teeth because no one thinks or talks like that in out in the real world. And
Yeah,
it's just this very weird specific kind of writing that is just yeah, the more unclear you are, the better it is seen. So
that's
I was
crazy.
feeling that in that section. um but yeah, so yeah, that's what sort of happened with like the first version. And then with the second version, I had a thesis advisor, Hari Kanjru, wonderful writer who wrote White Tears. He read it and told something I really needed to hear, which was just, this doesn't work in the first person, because the whole novel is about what Ingrid doesn't see about herself,
Oh,
all her blind
wow.
spots, right? So if you're in the first person,
Yeah.
how would she then be like, huh, all I now have this epiphany, like it wouldn't.
Yeah.
We sort of have to be able to see her in a way she can't
Can't
see
see
herself.
herself.
And sometimes
Yeah.
it's kind of comical, and I try to do it very lovingly even when she's being ridiculous.
Oh, it's very loving. It's super
Oh good.
loving and so relatable. I mean, it's like even opening it on her procrastination with her dissertation. I was like, man, I so identify with like my house is never cleaner than when I need to get something done that I'm avoiding. You know,
Right.
it's like I'm never more organized. It's incredible. Like suddenly I will organize 5 years worth of photos on my own iPhoto, or I will clean the closet that I haven't wanted to clean, or the refrigerator has suddenly been emptied, organized, and completely washed. You know, it's like
Exactly. Yeah. 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 So that's why, yeah, the first person didn't work. And then finally, I think I started writing this version, and it felt a little bit like not really combining the two, but just because I tested out these other voices and tones, that I was like, I think this is it. And luckily other readers were like, I think this is it too. And I was like, really? Okay, I'll keep going.
oh, that must be such a relief when people
Yeah.
key into it with you. It has a sense of for me, I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me almost like a Fleabag or something. Did you see Fleabag?
I love Fleabag.
Because but I'm realizing as you're saying this, because the way she wrote that show, it's like you get her internal life, but you also get perspective. You know what I mean? You're like, she's commenting on herself just as much as she's in herself. And so I
Right.
feel like I
Yeah.
think that's what I'm feeling, is that you kind of gave the reader space to be able to like look at her from a distance and see things she couldn't
Mm,
see for herself.
right,
And then
right.
also be with her enough to be like relating to her and understanding her and with her and rooting for her. I'm so excited to share that our podcast is brought to you in partnership with Seed. As many of you know, I am a huge advocate of this incredible company and their DSO1 Daily Symbiotic, which I have taken every day for years. DSO1 is a 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic formulated with 24 clinically and scientifically studied strains for whole body benefits, including gut, skin, and heart health. I started taking Seed daily because I love how seriously they are about their science. It's formulated based on robust clinical and mechanistic research with probiotic strains. And super good news, there's no refrigeration necessary. Seed's patented capsule and capsule design safeguards probiotics through digestion for delivery of an average of 100% of their starting dose to your colon. I also love Seed's commitment to environmental health. They have developed probiotics for honeybees, coral reefs, and have created new standards in sustainable packaging. Your first month of Seed includes a refillable glass jar and complimentary vial for on the go, and refills arrive each month in a compostable bio pouch. For our listeners, Seed is offering 25% off your first order. Go to seed.com/Jen's Bookshelf. Use code Jen's Bookshelf for 25% off your first order of Seed.
Fleabag was so smart in that letting us in, I think, was necessary because that character, Fleabag, does some terrible things,
Oh, yeah.
right? And and it's so easy for like, oh, if you're a woman character who's flawed in the slightest, you're just called unlikable.
Yeah, we're
you
still
know
there.
yeah, exactly. So it's like, so how are we supposed to be real people if we can't have flaw? But I think it was so smart that, like you said, she creates this balance of the internal, and it's not even like when she talks to you that she's being the most honest. Sometimes she's being the most honest when she's not talking to you.
Yeah.
It's delicate play of like what I want you to know, but actually what you know just on your own, because you're watching me even when I don't, you know, I'm not addressing you, I'm not looking at you. You're still there
Yeah.
and able to form your own judgments.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, I really admire Phoebe Waller-Bridge as a writer.
Well, I feel like you're you in your own separate voice from her, but I felt like the experience of watching that show is very much how I felt reading your novel, because I felt like it was so alive and kind of sizzling and crackling with the same kind of
Ooh.
wit and joy, and exploring dark edges of things in a way that was very relatable and lets you in. And yeah, so anyway, that's
Thank you,
my
Jennifer. Wow.
so this is a little bit random, but I think it was in maybe your Vogue interview where you said something
Mm.
about how the CIA founded the Iowa's Writers Workshop. Is that right? Is that,
Yes,
I know
there's
this
there's
is like a
more.
total left turn. Sorry, but I was like, when I read that, I was like, hang on, I have got to ask her about this. I was like, what are you, what? It's,
This is
and
something.
This gets
that
us into a
other
heavier subject because I know, like, you touch on really like some tough stuff with like the
mm,
fetishization of Asian women and like dealing with yellow face in plays and on screen and like all these different things. So, like, I know we're diving into a little bit of like a heavier place to bring this up, but like,
love it.
tell me explain to me how the CIA has to do with founding a writer's
Gosh.
workshop.
I need to refresh myself on when I read that. So
Mhm.
it is a known fact, but since I did not go to I feel like I don't know as
Sure.
much
We'll put a
as
disclaimer that we should all Google
yeah.
this in addition to this conversation.
Yes, yes. Please look this up. I even think it's on Wikipedia, but I remember when I did read about it, part of like American, I think like during which period was it? But it was basically like writing is subversive, right?
Right.
And writing can, I mean, it can make people revolt.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to remember the exact historical circumstances, but it was basically like if we teach a sort of writing that is, it's sort of like faux objectivism. It like makes you think it's objective, but it ended up creating this form and style of writing in America that persisted for a long time.
Mm.
And if you sort of deviated from it, I think it was like, oh, this is not seen as good writing. I think this is how I learned about it. And people were critiquing like, yeah, but don't you know that this standard of writing originated with like a school of thought and it was supported by these sort of political ideals because it was um and all that. Yeah, I'm missing these chunks of historical information, but that's what I remember when I read about it, that it was, it's not just a style of writing
Yeah.
as in, oh, this is just purely aesthetic. The style of writing was actually political.
That's so
um
interesting.
yeah, and to endorse a type of thinking, and I wish I could say more if I
Yeah,
knew.
but I mean, it makes, listen, I'm going to Google it too, but it makes a lot of sense because, especially at that college age time, we're all so susceptible, right? Like our minds are so open to things, and we're looking for what's the right way, like what's the best way to write something, or what's the best way to, whatever your major might be, like the best
Right.
way to fulfill these requirements. And that gets inside of us, that gets to be a part of what we're thinking. And it's wild to think that, you know, the government was kind of getting themselves enmeshed in the way young people were framing storytelling. It's really wild. Anyway, I will go and Google, and listeners go and Google the CIA and the Iowa's writing workshop.
Yeah.
Um, but that also makes me think about another thing that I feel like, again, I can't remember what article, which interview this was in, but you were talking about how, for so long in America, we've really been tied to this three-act structure, which is a very like Eurocentric way of storytelling that was kind of rooted in the ancient Greek ideas of writing. And that really jumped out at me when you were either talking about that or writing about that, because I do live in the world of like having to pitch in Hollywood, and man, that three-act structure and what has to happen on page 11 and page 27 and page, like all of it, we have such regimented things that, like, you've got all these people who are super creative who are trying to give people these new experiences creatively, and then you've got executives who are going, yeah, but did that happen on page 11 and did that happen on page 27? And you're like, oh man, I have to keep trying to fit my ideas into this box. And I realized I don't even know what another structure would be. Are there
Mm,
other sort of structures of storytelling that you have experienced or worked within or touched upon that are different than that three-act sort of Eurocentric structure?
me personally, no. I feel like I think if you sort of grew up in like in America or lots of parts of the West,
Yeah.
like we sort of just think of story as beginning, middle, end.
Yeah.
So even though, yeah, if you get really specific into like the beats of a certain genre, right? Or like a thriller versus a horror movie, then it'll get even more specific of what needs to be set up in the beginning, middle, end. But generally, I feel like all stories have them. I know there's this Japanese structure that I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I'll mess it up. It starts with a K, and it's like set up tension and then resolution, or set up conflict resolution, and it's sometimes portrayed as like an alternative to Western storytelling, because it doesn't necessarily have like a climax necessarily,
Oh,
but it's
interesting.
still beginning, middle, end. And when it's
Yeah.
charted out, it's still charted out as kind of like that little long bump, that
Yeah.
rises and falls
Yeah.
down. So I'm like, huh. And this is what's funny is I've talked about this book now multiple times, because some students will ask me about what alternative story structures are there. And there's a book that I've been told about many times that I really should read by now, called Meander, Spiral, Explode. And it is
I'm sorry,
about,
say that again because the feed sort of skipped, so I didn't quite
oh,
hear
no worries.
the title.
So the book is called Meander, Spiral, Explode.
Okay.
And I believe it's all about alternative storytelling that breaks out of this sort of pattern that we're so used to. Um, and yeah, I haven't actually myself experimented with writing one of those stories, or even write like a script or anything like that in that way. But what we're talking about, it made me think of the movie After Hours. Have you seen that, from like 1985?
I don't know that I feel like maybe, but I'm not sure. Who's the
It's,
filmmaker?
oh gosh, let me look it up.
Yeah.
It's such a strange movie, and there's lots of strange movies out there, and what we might call like art house movies. So it's by, oh yeah, Scorsese directed it. So that's like,
Oh,
apparently it
that little
was,
filmmaker, that guy? I
yeah,
think I've heard of him.
exactly. It's known as, like, yeah, I think one of his lesser known, but before he got really, really big, screenplay by Joseph Mignon. But check it out. I'd be interested to hear what you think, because it does not follow really any typical structure that I've seen in a movie. Maybe a little more like, like the French, what is it, new wave movies, kind of, where
Yes.
it's like more meandering,
Yeah.
but like all stories, it has a beginning, middle, and end, right? So it's like, do we ever really escape? Can we ever
Yeah.
really escape it?
Well, I
If
mean, I feel like in a way that even disorientation is like a what's the word I'm looking for? A variation on a theme, right? Where it's like, yes, you have a beginning, middle, and end. However, your end sort of feels like a beginning. So it's like, which I'm really fascinated with. I mean, that's something I've been writing a screenplay where my goal has been that the end is the beginning.
ooh,
And
cool.
so, and it's an interesting challenge because, people read it and are expecting things to be a certain way because we have
Right,
this set structure in our minds of what is like
right.
good and right. Maybe that's why that, when you spoke about the different structure stuff, it really grabbed me because I was like, yeah, but what's the variation of the theme? And it made me think about the end of your book. And I thought, well, the end really is the beginning for her. And so in a way, you know what I mean? Like, yes, there was a beginning and a
Mhm.
middle and a beginning for you, as opposed to like a
Yeah,
beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, yes, the book comes to an end because you stopped writing words that were published in this novel. But but really structurally, you did sort of set up a circle as opposed
mm.
to like a hill.
Oh, I love that. I hadn't even really thought of it. I should pretend I should
You can
pretend that
take it,
I
steal it.
intentionally did that all along. The structure of disorientation is actually a circle, if you didn't. Um, have you seen this video on YouTube? It's Christopher Nolan being interviewed about Memento, and someone's
Oh
like,
no, but I want to watch
"Oh,
that. Okay.
yeah." Someone's like, "So, like, can you talk about the structure, like how you plotted it out?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I think it might be impossible to do, but I suppose we could use a hairpin as a as like a visual." And so I don't know if he actually knew that all along and was predicting, but it's it's incredible the way he described it. So
Oh,
he
because it kind of
draws
goes like
a,
this way and back.
yeah, like a long U, like a U on its side. And he's like, the movie starts
Ah.
in the middle. And this line on the bottom are the scenes, like the black and white scenes are the scenes in the past. And the scenes at the top are also like the scenes in the past, but like a different past.
Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
the movie toggles between them. And so it begins at the middle and it ends at the start. It's wild, but that's literally what it is. It begins in the middle, ends at the start. So
Wow.
yeah, so that's I mean, if you're thinking about, yeah, this script, maybe like a hairpin, the idea of a hairpin or just some other shape
It is
that
interesting though that you're saying it that way because it's like it does help to think of things in a shape, right? Like it feels so overwhelming when you're just looking at this huge sort of body of words, right? And you're like,
right, right,
ah,
right.
what is this? And when you start to think of a shape to things, or even when you're talking about the triangular shape of Fargo, things like that, where it's like, oh, that
Mhm.
you do start to feel the shape of the storytelling a little bit differently.
Right.
And that's really cool. That's a really cool way to look at it. I'm going to look up that interview. I'm excited to watch that. How wild. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, so how did you oh my gosh, we have 5 minutes. This is like I could talk to you forever. I knew this was going to happen
Me
because I was like,
too.
man, there's so many things that I wanted to touch on. And I'm sorry that we haven't talked a tremendous amount about like details of the book, but I also feel like there's a million interviews of you online talking about a lot of that stuff. And I kind of wanted to just get to know you more and hear about your process and your inspiration, all that stuff. So
Yeah,
I
no,
guess
I love that.
the last thing I would ask you before my like very, very last question, which is what I ask everybody, but is just, how did you tackle some of the bigger subject matters and keep such a great sense of humor? Because I feel like there was something very powerful about the way that I understood things differently. You know what I mean? Like I had never really thought about a lot of the issues that you brought up because I haven't had to live through them. You kind of hear about certain things, but you don't necessarily live them, right? And so I felt like you really give the reader through your novel an experience of um those sort of like microaggressions on a daily basis, what it might feel like to be fetishized in a way that it never occurred to me, that the daily buildup of that and how that would press on someone, how disturbing and upsetting it would be to watch an entire culture sort of uh I don't know, just like erased in a way through like these yellow face experiences, and you were able to tackle all of that, but also keep the reader laughing and engaged and not feel like they were being preached to, or you know what I'm saying? So how did you approach that? How did you manage to achieve that balance?
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. Gosh.
Like I
I
feel
just
like I learned a lot. I really did. Like it was a total joy reading your novel, and at the same time I felt like I got an incredible education. I felt like you expanded my sense of empathy and
oh,
understanding for what the Asian American experience is. And there's nothing I can do to fully ever understand it, but you deeply expanded my empathy for someone walking that out.
that's incredible. I mean, that what you said, it's like was my hope, and that I could not, I don't know what the word is exactly, but talk about things in a way that were meaningful to me
Hmm.
that would not re-traumatize me. I think when I was writing,
Oh,
I didn't have space to hold for the audience. And I think it's a really common question, right? Like, who's your audience and
mm.
everything. I mean,
I feel like everyone's your audience. Who's your
right.
audience? Who's asking that question?
But when I'm like, when I was alone in my room, writing all of these drafts, and the audience was always me, all I could write towards was like me. And so I think a lot of the issues that are heavier were issues that had just been like knocking around in my head. And I think
Mm,
a lot of writers, whether or not they keep this in the book or not, you write to talk to yourself. Writing is like this
yeah.
long, weird mental psychological exercise in staring at your own thoughts in the mirror, right? Because like who, there's no one you're writing to in that computer screen. All that's there is you, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like when I was grappling with these things, I would sometimes feel like, ugh, I don't like thinking about this. Like I have to
Mm.
work it out because this is an obsession of mine and I can't stop thinking about it, or it bothers me, you know, it makes me upset. And yet I would like want an escape route for myself. So I think when I was writing it, I would build in these ways to like release the pressure a little so that
Mm.
I would not have to necessarily like relive, or just even if it wasn't reliving, but just sort of live in something traumatic,
Yeah.
right? And I think like during the period I was writing it, we had movies, for example, like Get Out. Like Get
Yeah.
Out really changed the game, I think, in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
because it was like we had seen, you know, movies that talked about the horrors of racism and the history of slavery that are like very realist, deeply, you know, difficult to watch.
Yep.
And Get Out was this kind of, it felt like the first, maybe I'm wrong, and there were
No,
predecessors, you know,
I mean,
but
I think it was definitely the most famous example that
right.
achieved that. Yeah.
Yeah, of like turning it on its head and infusing it with this, you know, very dark humor. And other examples of just films that use dark humor as this vehicle. You know, I think a lot of those storytellers, you're motivated to say something about the world that means to you, right? Like that's probably why you write, you know.
Yeah.
And I felt that when I was writing Disorientation. And yet personally, like me in my own life, like I don't necessarily want to just like watch something super traumatic or something, you know. And
Yeah.
humor gives you distance, it gives you a sense of power,
Mm.
right? Because it's like, okay, maybe in real life you would just get to be horrible and you would have the last laugh, right? But here in this space, you know, I can make this character look ridiculous. I have that power to laugh at him, right? What that quote of like, um, well, yeah, I won't quote it. I'm sorry. Um, Laughing at someone takes away their power, you know. So I
Yeah.
think that is maybe why a lot of creators who are invested in, you know, creation towards social change, um, lean towards dark humor.
That makes a lot of sense. I'd never thought about it that way, but that really does make sense. It's a way to invite the audience in and give them a chance to have the distance to decide how they're going to interact with it. But at the same time, it does disempower the, the people that are doing the bad things, and disempowers the people that are causing the trauma. And yeah, that's really powerful. It's really cool. I never thought about it that way. That makes a lot of sense.
Oh, no, I promise you, I'm not the originator of this. I'm sure I've taken this. I read
That's all
somewhere.
right. So like I said, I could talk to you forever. I have post-its all over my desk of questions for you,
Oh,
but my last question, and this is just what I kind of ask everybody at the end, is just, is there a piece of advice that you had been given at some point? It doesn't have to be about writing, but whether it's about writing or life or getting through the day or whatever, is there a piece of advice that stuck with you that you would want to share with our listeners?
mm. I feel like I'm gonna share like this one because I actually re-encountered it recently. And it's a quote by Octavia Butler.
Okay.
She says, to paraphrase, it's like, when I write, I create myself, something like that. Like
Hmm.
I write to create myself. And it was such a powerful reminder of like, sometimes our art can feel so outwardly focused, right? Like for you as
Yeah.
a director, I'm sure you know this feeling of like, is this going to reach audiences? Like what are the box office numbers going to be, and who will be your like investor on this? And on the book side, it's you know, a lot of talk about like the audience and how it's received and everything. And I think reading that quote, it was like, oh, I write to create myself. Like writing is necessary. And I think for you, like directing, being an artist, it's just necessary for you as a person, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is how I'm growing into myself, creating
Yeah.
something. Sometimes, when it can touch someone externally, it's always like this extra beautiful bonus. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if we're not doing it to sort of learn more also about ourselves and write into ourselves, create to also create ourselves, it's like you'll just get lost, and
Yeah.
you'll just end up like losing, I think, the thread of what made you want to be an artist in the first place. So I think that it's such a powerful idea, and
Yeah, it's
something I
really
need to like
beautiful.
keep over my desk.
Yeah, I'm going to too. I'm taking it. It's really yeah, that's it, and it's so succinct. It's not
Yeah,
complicated.
right.
It's just the truth. That's
Yeah.
really cool. I love that. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for hanging out with us for this time. And please just keep us posted on anything you write in the future. I mean, I also have here what white men say in our absence, which is a really profound essay. I just feel like everything you've written, I've had such a strong reaction to. So I know you're working on a screenplay version of Disorientation right now, but I hope you're also planning to write another novel because it will definitely be on my bookshelf.
Thank you, Jennifer. And hearing you like mention these other things I've written and interviews, it means a lot to me that you just spent time with. It's like we've gotten to know each other, in this way where
Yeah.
even before a meeting, which is always so magical and precious. And I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.